All right, Trump was very upset because someone he appointed saw the illegality of his deploying of the military into cities, and in this case specifically Portland, that Trump is calling war ravaged. And then I was trying to find, I was like, I never want to misrepresent the situation. You can both have Trump doing something wrong and an out of control situation in a city. There could be both. It's true. And I was looking, and from all I could find, we're talking about a block. One block. And he's saying the city of Portland is war ravaged and there's protests in a block. So even someone he appointed said this is not how the military is supposed to be used. Trump was very upset. Let's listen to him. His typical quintessential shouting match with reporters as he stands outside of a very loud Marine One.
I wasn't served well if they put judges like that on. I wasn't served well by the people that pick judges, I can tell you. Things like that are just too bad. I appointed the judge and he goes like that. So I wasn't served well. Obviously, I don't know the judge. But if he made that kind of a decision, Portland is burning to the ground. You have agitators, insurrectionists. All you have to do is look at the television, turn on your television, read your newspapers. It's burning to the ground. The governor, the mayor, the politicians are petrified for their lives.
Mr. President,
and you have a judge like that, that judge ought to be ashamed of himself.
That judge ought to be ashamed of himself. He is someone I appointed. He did something wrong. Despite he being a she. Ron Filipkowski says the judge is a woman. But, hey, maybe Trump just hasn't spent enough time figuring out the question that MAGA asks us every day, which is, what is a woman? Maybe it's not that he got a brain lapse of some sort. It's weird to appoint someone, have a ruling come down from that judge against you, rail against them, and not even know at all who they are. How can you know they're biased and they're a rhino and they're terrible without even knowing who they are? Clearly, because he doesn't know the gender. Or maybe he's just confused about the concept of gender. Of course, we did have this this clip.
Well, since Democrats seem to struggle answering this question, I wanted to ask you, what is a woman and why is it important that we understand the difference between men and women?
Well, it's sort of easy to answer for me because a woman is somebody that can have a baby under certain circumstances. She has a quality. A woman is a person who's much smarter than a man, I've always found. A woman is a person that doesn't give a man even a chance of success. And a woman's a person that in many cases has been treated very badly, because I think that what happens with this crazy.
So maybe he's just confused, but I guess he didn't know who he was even talking about. So some details, and this is a very intense subject, obviously. A federal judge in Oregon temporarily blocked President Donald Trump's administration for deploying the National Guard in Portland, ruling Saturday in a lawsuit brought by the state and city judge Karen Immergut. Quote, "This country has a long-standing and foundational tradition of resistance to government overreach." He appointed her, especially in the form of military intrusion into civil affairs. This historical tradition boils down to a simple proposition. This is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. So what is Trump doing here? Does he actually think Portland is war ravaged? No. He needs a crisis. This is really important for the sort of authoritarian ideology. Even if it's not, of course, anyone breaking the law, people should protest if they want to protest, and being opposed to many of the actions Trump's ICE is taking is perfectly fair. Breaking the law or getting violent is horrible and not the way that you express those differences. And to whatever extent law breaking is happening in those protests, local law enforcement can and should be the ones handling, and should do so with tact. And we've seen many insane examples of that not happening. But Trump, that doesn't play into Trump's narrative. it also doesn't play into his narrative that it happens to be, and it's not just protests, he's also just saying we have to go send in the military everywhere to get crime under control, that Portland has recorded the steepest drop in homicides this year of 6. Why does he always pick the ones with this? And this was a trend at the end of Biden's era into the Trump era, or it predated Trump is my point. This trend that we've seen, and it's continued at the beginning of this year, of 68 U.S. cities representing the Major Cities Chiefs Association. 51% decrease in homicide rates. That doesn't play into his narrative. But if you start escalating the situation like you tried to do in LA, then maybe you can induce some of that imagery that then causes him to be the great strong man coming in to solve out of control criminality than this.
Follow the judge's order in Portland.
We're going to look at that. It was amazing. Portland is burning to the ground. It's insurrectionists all over the place. It's Antifa. And yet the politicians who are petrified. Look, the politicians are afraid for their lives. That's the only reason that they say, like, there's nothing happening. And you've seen it. The place is burning down, and they pretend like there's nothing happening.
I don't know if someone's showing him videos from somewhere else, or because again, I was trying to see if I could find what are we talking about. Here's CBS Weekend News reporting on this. They play some imagery, but it's like when I searched "burning down Portland," I was like, "Oh, here are the videos," and it was from 2020. So I'm sure maybe a fire or something like that. And wrong, just to be clear, and law enforcement should handle that. But he's trying to induce, and this is very parallel to the LA situation, a crisis. That is what he's trying to do here.
Over the Trump administration's immigration crackdown significantly escalated. Angry residents faced off against heavily armed federal agents. They held down some protesters and used tear gas against others. In a separate incident, one woman was shot and injured after what the Department of Homeland Security said were defensive shots. This as Governor J.B. Pritzker warned that President Trump is activating 300 National Guard troops against his wishes. Tensions are also high.
And then it goes on, about Chicago. But even Scott Jennings here agreed, we're talking about a block. One block. But a war-ravaged block.
That it's happening in one block of the city.
Is that, how many blocks is it?
Does that constitute Portland being a war-ravaged city?
I think what's happened in Portland is a disgrace. Nobody wants to go there. And yes, parts of the city are ravaged by these protesters. And federal officials
describe the city as being
believe their facilities are under attack.
Even when there are violent protests, which, by the way, nothing new about violent protests, as you know.
So it's not new, so we should let it go.
When violent protests happen, law enforcement has a responsibility to handle it. But would you describe an entire city as war-ravaged when there are protests, even if they're violent, that's happening outside of a single building?
Yes, I would say if there are violent protests happening against a federal facility, they are being ravaged. I completely agree with that language.
Okay, all right.
Okay, all right. So it's hard to trust the intentions, as Scott wants us to, when Trump's on the record saying the military should be using American cities as a training ground for war, and that the enemy from within should be dealt with the military. And every act that Trump does like this only heightens tensions and makes violence more likely. And I mean, are we supposed to believe that Trump really thinks a war is going on one square block in a city? I mean, this is what he's doing. Looks very panicked about the state of play here. Podcast listeners, I'm showing him golfing this weekend. Please do, as we continue through this segment, we have a lot more to talk about. Click the subscribe button if you appreciate the show. The National Guard troops dispatched, the New York Times reports, by President Trump to fight domestic terrorists in this war-ravaged city of Portland will face an unexpected challenge: naked bicycle riders. Now, this is genius. Cycling in the buff is a Portland specialty, and one organization has announced a naked ride in response to the militarization of our city. Such is the war zone here. And the next quote is They're going to war with their swords. No, I made that up. Indignant Portlanders have been sharing Instagram photos of lovely city scenes to counter Trump's description of Portland as hell. An Oregonian who lives outside Portland, I can testify that the city has heavenly qualities with a setting that is divine and food catered by angels, but in fairness, it has also significant problems. And it goes through those problems. And that's an important thing that I want to acknowledge too, is I am extremely passionate about Democrats not being irrational on crime. And we as Americans seriously addressing that issue. And so when we push back against Trump's characterization, it's not to say whatever city he's talking about, DC or Chicago, Portland, doesn't have problems, in some cases unique challenges that should be addressed. It's that, number one, we see how Trump is trying to weaponize the military just against his political foes and to stoke fear to justify authoritarian acts, as even his appointee called illegal. But number two, the systemic solution to crime and the short-term solution to protests that get out of control isn't sending in the troops. And the progress that we've seen in some cities in addressing crime hasn't been through the militarization of the situation. Now, apparently, despite Trump being slapped down by the federal judge that he appointed, he's charging forward, but kind of trying to do a loophole after federal court blocked his attempt. This is Gavin Newsom posting this, to federalize the Oregon National Guard. Donald Trump is deploying 300 California National Guard personnel into Oregon. They're on the way there now, which is not how that works, surely. Oh, but they said we couldn't federalize the Oregon National Guard. It's the same. I think it's even worse that you're sending the California National Guard into Oregon. We are taking this fight back to court. The public cannot stay silent in the face of such reckless and authoritarian conduct by the President of the United States. That was Gavin Newsom. So we'll keep ourselves updated on that. And then just a couple little miscellaneous things I want to update you on. 2 state off-year elections that are happening. And I've been meaning to talk about this. But Mikey Sherrill, I'm sure you've heard of this, is running for governor in New Jersey against Jack Ciattarelli. And someone associated with Jack Ciattarelli accessed military records of the Democrat Mikey Sherrill that were released by the National Archives of the Trump administration. And the documents included Sherrill's social security number, home addresses of her parents and her life insurance information, her performance evaluation, non-disclosure agreements. All these different things were illegally released and then used by the Ciattarelli campaign. And what bombshell did they find? That if I'm reading this correctly, which I am, that Mikey Sherrill, when she was at the Naval Academy, was caught up in a cheating scandal. But she didn't cheat in the scandal. She didn't inform on the kids who did cheat, which is your only option usually. Think about the amount of times you've looked over and you've been like, oh, that person's cheating. And how many times do you go, you're gonna get got if you do that. Okay? Now, do it if you can. And maybe you go privately to your teacher. But that just, as I'm saying it, I want you to both not cheat and have friends. I want both for you. I'm trying to help. I want both for you. And I think if you were to stand up, it would cause a problem. But some people, what am I saying? Of course you should inform on everyone all the time. Never cheat. I've never cheated, ever. I haven't. I actually haven't in tests or quizzes or exams of any sort. Outside of that, no comment. Okay, a homework. Oh, you can't cheat on homework. But Ciattarelli was confronted on this and didn't exactly deny that her privacy was completely violated. She was doxxed, and all they found was that she didn't. Let me just really quickly. the documents, Cheryl was not accused of cheating and said her only involvement was not informing on her fellow classmates. Yeah, that's not really a scandal. It's really not.
So those military service records that were released by the archives, it did have that unredacted information. Did you or any member of your campaign obtain those records that were unredacted and then distribute them to members of the media or elsewhere like she had just said here?
Opposition research takes place all the time. Yes. My opponent has done a whole bunch of opposition research on me. There's a team that's responsible for opposition research. It did make its way into the press, so I'm sure at some point...
But did it make its way to the Ciattarelli campaign? Did anybody in your campaign get those files and then disseminate?
Yeah, that I don't know, Dan. There's a team that's responsible for opposition research.
So that's a yes, obviously. But it's not about opposition research. It's that it violates the Privacy Act of 1974, Mr. Ciattarelli. And it's dangerous. And it violated her privacy. And you didn't end up getting to expose anything that I think would be very relevant. I saw that guy. Who's that guy who's always like, what's up, guys? It's... Scott Presler. Hey guys, it's Scott Presler here. We're registering votes. And he was confronting Mikey Cheryl. Why did you do cheating or not do? Why did you not tell about the other people doing cheating? Are we really supposed to be outraged about that? Now, so that's that Democrat. I hope she wins governor. Went to the Naval Academy. My brothers did. Woo, it's for cool. And she didn't even cheat. New Jersey. But then we move to Virginia. And you have Abigail Spanberger running for governor there. I hope she wins. She's the Democrat in that race. But the Democrat running for attorney general, see, Republicans, when you freak out over fake scandals like Mikey Cheryl, then I see headlines, oh, Trump's calling for someone to drop out, whatever. And I don't believe it's actually going to be real. This one, and yes, it's important that we also hold accountable Democrats whenever they say crazy things, is actually a scandal. Trump calling on Jay Jones to drop out. And let me just read you the text that leaked. So Jay Jones running for attorney general in Virginia, this off-year election, could be very consequential, and was texting a Republican House delegate, Kerry Coyner, about the former state House Speaker, Todd Gilbert, a Republican. So Jay Jones, Democrat, texting somebody about a Republican. And this was the text exchange. So the other person says, they say nice things about everyone, lol. And then Jay responds, if those guys die before me, I will go to their funerals to piss on their graves, send them out awash in something. To which the person he's texting responds, Jay Jones. And he says, 3 people, 2 bullets, Gilbert, Hitler, and Pol Pot. Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. Spoiler, put Gilbert in the crew with 2 worst people you know, and he receives both bullets every time. And the person responds, Jay, please stop. And he says, lol, okay. And then the person says, it really bothers me when you talk about hurting people or wishing death on them. And then we jump up here. You weren't simply asking questions and you know it. I genuinely was. Jay says, I wasn't attacking you. I was trying to understand your logic. The other person says, you weren't trying to understand. You were talking about hoping Jennifer Gilbert's children would die, but they write it hopping Jennifer Gilbert. Yes, I've told you this before. Only when people feel pain personally do they move on. Policy, and this is, I mean, do I think Todd and Jennifer are evil and they're breeding little fascists? Yes. As they're talking about. So point is, talking about a bullet to the head of this Republican former state House Speaker, especially, I'm sure the defense is I was making a joke, but especially in this political environment, that's insane and completely wrong. And I denounce it fully and completely. And I do think that's important too, because sometimes we get in such team sports. And it's important to understand that in races, I essentially always don't want the Republican to win. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be critical of when stuff like this comes to light about the Democrat on that side. That's dangerous. Talking about bullets to the head and the what was it about the kids? The kids, you know, feeling pain, then that'll cause people to move on policy. Unacceptable. And I know people respond like, oh, but Republicans don't care when Marjorie Taylor Greene was endorsing messages about Pelosi getting a bullet to the head, or they make a joke. And as I said after the Kirk assassination, exactly. us seeing that behavior and going, that's terrible, to make light of it or to say things like that, then means we would never do it. And if someone we align more with politically does, then it's even more an important responsibility to call it out. And I should add, he did issue an apology saying, I'm so deeply, deeply sorry for what I said, and I wish that it hadn't happened, and I would take it back if I could, Jones told WRIC. Yeah, that's rough, especially in a time of worsening political violence.